Balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Episode number 203. Welcome to All About Breastfeeding, the place where the girls hang out. I am your host, Lori Jill Eisenstadt, IBCLC, and I help moms with breastfeeding. If you would like to learn more about the lactation consults that I provide and other services that I have, please go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz. In Season 6 of All About Breastfeeding FAQs, we have been working our way through the theme for the Season 6, titled Birth Matters. Where you give birth, how you give birth, when you give birth, who you give birth with. It all has an impact on your breastfeeding journey. We have so far tackled such subjects like postpartum hemorrhage, premature birth, and birth trauma, and their relationship to breastfeeding difficulties. On today's show, we are going to get into the subject of who you give birth with. You might wonder, why is this even an issue? Well, if you have not been in this position personally, I understand why you would be questioning that this could even be an issue. I was just like you at one time, and I bet you anything, so were some of my listeners before they gave birth the first time. Up until that time, we have our dreams and hopes and fantasies and wishes about how our birth goes. We've read, we've taken classes, we have our birth plan, and everything is ready to go. The one big thing that I failed to realize is that there are just some things that are beyond our control. By my second labor, I made my plans. I had my hopes and wishes and dreams. But I also added one very important element the second time around, though, that I learned. I had to make myself not hold on to my dreams so closely. Every day, I had to tell myself that I will plan for the best and make room for the unknown and unexpected. Until we go through it ourselves, it is hard for us to really understand what it's like to be in labor, work along with our contractions. We're maybe very textbook smart and not necessarily real life labor savvy because we have never done this before. I learned, though, that as the labor progresses, that you need the freedom to be yourself, to spend time uninterrupted, and not have to pay attention to anyone or anything else except yourself. Who you give birth with matters a great deal. If it is helpful, this can give you a huge advantage and help you help yourself. If there is a person or persons who it turns out to be are a hindrance and they are distracting you in your way, they're not helpful, it could literally change the course of your whole labor and put you in circumstances that you did not plan for. The first question to ask yourself is, what do you want? I have my own thoughts on this subject, as I have been to many births, and I have facilitated hundreds of groups in which the focus of talking about in the group was about their labor and birth, and moms have taken up to an hour or more to detail and share with us their experience. I've had the opportunity to listen to thousands of mothers talk about how they felt about their birth, before and after. My thoughts in this show come from my own personal experience, and yes, absolutely, of course, from all the moms I have listened to their stories. I also decided to do a little internet surfing and see what is currently going on in the birthing world that perhaps I am not aware of. Sure enough, there is this new term I saw mentioned in several places, and it talked about the fact that the average woman now has about 8 people in the room during the course of her giving birth. This phenomenon is being referred to as crowd birthing. And I thought, what a perfect term to use. And this is a far cry from what it was like when birth moved to the hospital and all family, including dads, were banned from being in the labor room. Gradually, from pressure from parents and families, dads were now allowed to accompany the laboring mom. Slowly, the tides kept turning. And now, if you wanted your mom or a child or your doula in the room, that was okay. And now, moms have their massage therapist, their chiropractor, their birth photographer, their sister, their mom, their best friend, their doula, their sibling doula. A sibling doula is there for a younger child you have at the birth. Crowd birthing is a good term for this. And you have to ask yourself, is this a good idea for you? I think until you actually give birth, some people just don't realize that this puts the birthing mom, it can put her in a very awkward position. Do you realize that you're basically the star of the show, and some of the people you invite will be your audience, viewing the show? Do they have a reason to be there? Are they going to be helpful and doing things? Or are they just going to be a spectator? Should your mother really be at your birth? How about your mother-in-law? What about the chiropractor that you absolutely love and kind of sort of invited herself to the birth, saying she could give you adjustments during your labor, and you thought, wow, you really helped me during my pregnancy. I'd love to have you at labor. And so you're like, okay. What about your best friend? Should she be at your birth? Or your 4-year-old? What about the person who just kind of invited themselves? They just made an assumption and you don't know how to tell them no. What if you said no? But all these people, they're crowding in a room next to where you're laboring. You said you can't be in the birthing room, but they're all hanging around outside. And you hear all the noise. You know they're all outside the door, and you know that some of them are secretly hoping they can come in. Talk about performance anxiety. You know, you may be able to pay attention to all of these people in early labor, and it might actually work in your favor, because during early labor, distraction can be helpful before you need to really focus. However, as you progress through the stages of labor, your world around you becomes smaller and smaller. I remember having an awareness of all my surroundings in early labor. When you start labor, you're aware of everything around you, the room you're in, the sights, the sounds, the smells. You can easily listen and pay attention and join in a conversation with others. You're listening to music, you're watching the TV show or movie, and you can really pay attention to the game you're all playing, and it's a good distraction. But as your contractions become closer and longer, in order to work along with them and not fight it, you will really need to concentrate on the contractions. You need to focus on riding that wave and being aware of its peak and knowing when it begins to subside. The more people you have around you, the more voices you have to pay attention to, the more questions you have to answer, the more you think you have to act a certain way, the more difficult it becomes to work along with your contractions. Let's think about it. Think about working on an important task, one that you need quiet and focus. And each time someone distracts you by asking a question, and you have to get your head back into it again. Well, labor is like this, except even more so, as the concentration and focus is so much more than anything you have ever done before. People hovering over us, well, for some of us, it makes us want to scream, leave me alone already. I have had to take aside, quite lovingly, a well-meaning partner and suggest that they just be there, close at hand to you, but ask you if you need anything just once in a while, but to not ask you after each contraction. Because here's what happens. They see you working with the contraction and maybe they're massaging your back or your neck and they don't know when to stop. They don't know when the contraction is over. So they're saying to you, is it over? Is it over? Is it gone? And for you, you're like, no, not yet. And that's very distracting. And I start to see this look on laboring mom's face. I could literally see it a mile away. And I can tell when she just needs people around her to just keep quiet. When things are beginning to get hairy, as they do for most of us in labor, you can literally sabotage your labor if you have others around you that are interfering in your ability to be yourself, to make noise and move and dance and sway and squat. Squat on the floor, over the toilet. I mean, think about how you have asked to be with you in your labor. Can you really handle your mother or mother-in-law or sister-in-law or your neighbor next door or perhaps the photographer that you hired? Can you handle them seeing you in situations you might be uncomfortable with? Do you really want them watching you lift up your shirt or gown so you can squat on the floor, perhaps sit on the toilet bowl, get on all fours? Can you imagine them hearing you become vocal, your noise and groans getting louder and deeper? Some of us make some incredible sounds, kind of like we're wild animals when we're in labor. If you are going to feel inhibited to vocalize or cry or throw something in frustration or use foul language with someone whom you've invited to your birth, you might want to rethink about this. Not being able to labor uninhibited can cause your inability to work along with contractions, slow them down, stop them, and even make them worse than they need to be. All of these scenarios put you at a greater risk to need interventions that perhaps you were hoping like the dickens to avoid. Perhaps you have learned that medication can affect a newborn, and you wanted to try and avoid this from happening to help you get off to an easy breastfeeding start. Well, too many people around, it can really change the course of your labor, create a need for intervention that you might not have otherwise had. About 13 years or so ago, I was a birth doula for a mom who was planning a home birth. Speak about not wanting someone to see you squat over the toilet bowl. Well, this mom, I'll call her Nancy. The only way Nancy could get into the rhythm of pushing and feel like she was pushing using the right energy and vocalization was by sitting on the toilet bowl. She did so just by kind of following her own way there. None of us suggested it for her. Her mom had left her bedroom for a short while to feed her father and some other people that were outside in the living room, and Nancy had gravitated to the toilet. When her mom came back, and a few minutes later, Nancy kind of came out of the zone of having a contraction, this haze she was in, she realized her mother was standing up, leaning against the sink in the bathroom, and just looking down at her daughter. Well, Nancy's immediate response was to sit up straight, and I swear I felt like she almost bounced off that toilet seat. When the next contraction came, she leaned to hold onto her husband and dealt with a few contractions standing up this way. Myself and her midwife, we kind of talked about it, and we could really feel the energy shift. We could see that Nancy tightened. She was holding her breath, not vocalizing. And we know this can really work against you during your labor and actually make contractions more painful and less productive. We recognize that having her on the toilet, well, that really helped her to open up. But she changed her positioning more than likely because she was embarrassed for her mother to see her like that. So she stood up and assumed a position that she probably felt was more acceptable for her to be laboring in, but not necessarily the one that felt most comfortable for her. Nancy had performance anxiety. After about 30 or 40 minutes with her struggling, I just took a chance and I asked her mom, "You want to come sit with me for a few minutes in the kitchen?" The midwife talked to Nancy while I was gone and asked her how she felt about the situation. And you know what? Her intuition was right on. She asked her if she would like to tell her mother herself if she would stay in the kitchen, and Nancy said no. She then asked her if she would like for one of us to keep her mom outside, explain to her mom how she felt, and keep her busy. And Nancy, very gratefully, shook her head and said, "Yes, can you talk to my mother?" Well, if you're guessing that Nancy found her way back to the toilet, you are absolutely 100% correct. She labored there for a while longer, pushed for a good half hour or more, until she decided she wanted to get up and stand up again. She walked over to her bed, climbed on top, got on all fours, staying there pushing until her baby was born. And we talked about her labor afterwards. She did express to her midwife that she was glad someone had the presence of mind to take her mom out of the room and wait until the baby was born to bring her back. She had time to think about it, and she said there was no way she could see herself on her bed on all fours with her breast hanging down, her legs spread, and bodily fluids coming out while her mom watched. She realized she would never have assumed that position, and she now feels that is exactly the position she needed to be in to birth her baby. So, during your labor, I'm telling you, you're going to get hot. You're going to get sweaty. You may not be able to stand to have any clothes against your skin, or even loose pants or a dress or a t-shirt on. If left alone, you just know you would take your shirt off. Perhaps your bra, keep it on, maybe a sports bra, and no underwear around on you at all. But you're looking around the room and feeling like you have an audience, and you're thinking to yourself, there is no way I am going to do that. I am going to keep my clothes on. So your labor continues, and you don't even realize it, but you are holding back, vocalizing. And this does not allow you to best work with your contractions. You're holding back, swaying your hips from side to side, something you intuitively begin to do so, but then stop because you could feel all eyes on you in the room. Having people in the room who you cannot totally be yourself with can have a dramatic negative effect on your labor. Labor truly is hard work, and how we position ourselves can change how our labor progresses. So I'm asking you, please take some time and think about the people you have invited or the people that you're thinking about inviting, that you will probably, maybe even people you're going to have to say yes to just because they asked and you don't want to hurt their feelings. Please try and remember, this is your labor and your birth, not theirs. Some moms have said to me, they don't want to be selfish. And I would like to tell you, in this case, it is your turn and it will work in your favor, and it is okay for you to be selfish. You need to take care of yourself. Please try hard to not let the fear of upsetting or insulting someone cause you to make a grave mistake, one that you will regret for years to come. You may not know this now. However, there will be many, many, many times when you will be put in a position where you will have to decide if you want to do something your way or do it someone else's way because you don't want to hurt their feelings. Let's think about this for a few minutes. Pick a time when you did something and it was under quiet protest because you didn't want to hurt someone else's feelings, and the issue was really important to you. It was personal, but you just didn't have the nerve to say or do anything different. Just think about how you felt afterwards. Were you left feeling angry, resentful, annoyed? Were you pissed off at yourself for not voicing your preference? Did you walk away from that experience having regrets? This is not about your partner or others. This is your body, a private experience only to be shared who you are comfortable with. And yes, I have been privy to quite a few couples' arguments about this issue, where he insists that it is his baby and his labor too. Well, it is his baby, but not his body. Try and talk to him and tell him how you're feeling about being vulnerable in front of this person. And remind him that while he might want this person around, you may be walking around in a state of half undressed, exposing body parts, making noise, peeing, and yes, pooping. This does happen when you're pushing and you cannot control it. And you need to tell him how this will make you feel with having an audience. Of course, if you're totally cool with it, and there are enough moms who are, that's not a problem. But if you are not cool with it and will feel uncomfortable, you need to remind yourself that this is your labor and your birth. You know, once your baby's born, family and friends, they're going to have all sorts of opinions about babies' names, what foods you feed your baby, sleeping habits, toilet training, about you returning to work, breastfeeding in public, how long you breastfeed for. And I bet you anything that along the way you will be hurting or insulting people all over the place for all kinds of decisions you make as a mother. I have had to deal with this. A personal situation related to one of my babies, not about the labor and birth, but another issue. I had strong feelings which differed from the majority. I didn't want to hurt feelings. I buckled under the pressure. I'm not quite sure I have ever forgiven myself for this, and it is one of only 2 regrets that I have as a mother. Just one of 2, that I didn't say no. But I will save this story for another day. What I want you to get from this is stay strong and let your voice and your wishes be heard on this one. Who you give birth with matters a whole lot. It matters how you feel about your birth even years later. Who you give birth with, it matters if you felt it led you to feeling out of control or inhibited and caused you to need an intervention. Who you give birth with, it matters if you just could not relax, if your contractions were not doable, and you wound up asking for pain medication, and this medication slowed down your labor. Once your labor slowed down, you needed more medication to speed it back up again, and things happened during your labor that you're annoyed at. Perhaps you felt pressure to walk or sit or stand or act a certain way because others felt that it would help your labor, and they were Badinsky. They were telling you what you should do, and you really weren't feeling it. Who you give birth with matters. It can have a positive impact on your labor and birth, or it can have a negative impact. Choosing the right people and not having them stray from what you anticipated them doing and being there for you during your labor is a beautiful thing. This person or persons can be exactly what you needed, lifted you out of a dark place where you were exhausted and losing control and didn't think you could go on any longer. They can do and say all the right things to help you get right back on track and realize the labor you've been hoping for. This is the person or persons you want to invite to your birth space. But the wrong person, it can also leave you feeling that you made a big, bad mistake. Taking a little break, I would like to welcome you to our Facebook page. Some of the topics this past week, we've talked about baby's weight gain, milk supply issues, tips on helping your exclusively breastfed baby take the bottle so you could go out for date night. We've had moms' concerns about having inverted nipples and getting their babies to latch on. I also posted a link to my sales page as I am selling some Bravado bras for literally half the retail rate. You will find this link to the sales page for the Bravado bras in the Facebook page. I welcome everyone to join us. All you need to do is punch in these 4 words, all about breastfeeding community, and you need to have community on there. Otherwise, it brings you to the wrong page. Once in the group, just look around, introduce yourself, and enjoy some of the discussions. I would also like to thank J Star, who left a fabulous 5-star review in iTunes for me. She said the show is a lifesaver for breastfeeding moms. She said, as a new breastfeeding mom, listening to this podcast has been a lifesaver. Lots of practical and helpful information, and Lori is super comforting and empowering. Thank you so much. Every rating and review is so meaningful to me. This podcast takes a lot of time to produce, and it is done outside of my usual working hours. My listeners, you people, are all my bosses. I do my best to provide content, to provide shows that are of interest to most of you. So whenever I get a positive review, it's just like your boss coming up to you, patting you on the back, or just saying, hey, you're doing a great job. And we all know how good that feels. Such a simple gesture can keep a smile on your face that whole day of work. Positive reviews keep a smile on my face all day long. Thanks, J Star, for taking the time to do so. And anybody who wants to leave a review, all you do is go to All About Breastfeeding in iTunes, and you will see a little link there, and it says rate and review. Nice and easy for you to do, and incredibly meaningful to me. All right, let's get back to the show where we pick up the conversation after talking about being sure you have asked the right person or people to be with you during your labor and birth. Now that I have you thinking about your birth and the people who will be there with you, now you need to think, what can you do to ensure that you have the right people with you? Well, here are some tips on how to choose your person or your people carefully. Ask yourself, would you feel weird having them come to your prenatal appointments while your caregiver asked you personal questions about medication, your health issues? Have you had surgeries, breast surgeries, nipple piercings? What is your relationship like with this person? Do you cringe at the thought of them being around you when you're sick and don't look your best and you would never want them seeing you? Have you ever gotten undressed in front of this person? Would you ever have them stand outside the door while you're in the bathroom making some noises? Birth is noisy, and I want you to think practically. So, practically speaking, is there enough room in the space that you're giving birth to have the number of people you want? Things can get crowded pretty quickly. You will want the ability to move around freely without feeling like you are laboring in Grand Central Station. You will also want to discuss with them ahead of time that you're welcoming them for all the reasons, but you also want them to be aware that you might ask them to leave. Things change during your labor, and perhaps you don't want that photographer there anymore that you asked to be there. She told you she would be on the sidelines and like a wallflower, and you'd never know she was there. But now she's in your face, coaching you when you don't really want to be coached. Perhaps your best friend is a birth doula and you thought it would be really cool to have her at your labor, but she's kind of making you feel pushed into doing your labor her way, standing up, squatting, leaning when you're not feeling that you want to do that. She's giving you way too much guidance on her part, and you've now changed your mind and want her to leave the room. Perhaps your child, who you felt you prepared really well for being with you in labor, well, maybe the timing is off and it's late at night, or she got woken up in the middle of the night, or it's early morning and, she's tired and whiny and needy and wants you to hold her and read books. And at the moment, you just cannot do it. You will need an adult to take her out of the room, at least for a little while. It may seem awkward to do this talk ahead of time, but I can appreciate that. However, I also know that it can be much more awkward to have it during your birth. Better that these people know ahead of time that the plans can change, so they have been forewarned, than to spring it upon them and increase their disappointment and hurt feelings during the heat of the moment. What about uninvited guests that you totally did not plan on? What if there's a labor nurse who you're just not connecting with, or she's just rubbing you the wrong way? Do not accept that this is the way it needs to be. I have been to more than one birth in my time that this has happened, and I've suggested that you ask your partner to just go to the nurse's station and ask to speak with the head nurse or the nursing supervisor. You explain the situation nicely, that this nurse is doing their job well, but there's a personality conflict and you're just clashing, and you can see that this is upsetting your wife. You ask very nicely if there's someone else who can please take your nurse's place, and you would appreciate it very much, as you can see that this will be comforting to your wife. There is no problem with asking to switch out the nurses. Sometimes they will be able to comply, and it will help a whole lot. Preparing the invited birth guests ahead of time will help them to not feel too disappointed, or will help you from not worrying too much about hurting their feelings because you had the discussion ahead of time. After your baby's born, who you have in your room in the first 24 hours and the first few days matters. Well, why? Because it's going to have a major impact on breastfeeding. Again, you'll be breastfeeding, and to do this, you need to have the freedom to have your breasts exposed, keep them out of the bra and gown to make it more convenient. I have been in a room ready to help moms. I've worked as a consultant in the hospital, knocked on the door, been invited in. They wanted me to help them with breastfeeding. They told their nurse, but now they asked me if I could please come back because they have visitors there in the room who need to hang out and be with the baby. Well, the problem is I might not get a chance to come back. By the time I'm swinging back to your room, my shift may be over. I've been in rooms when moms are too shy to take out their breasts because the people in the room, they're family and friends, and they've never shown them their breasts before, and they're shy about it. But they also don't ask them to leave. I've also been in rooms where I've needed to ask moms some questions, and they really don't want to talk to me and tell me about some health history that's important to breastfeeding in front of other people. Also, when there's people in the room, sometimes I notice your baby's being passed around from person to person. Everybody is so excited to see the baby and hold the baby. What happens, though, is that we miss early feeding cues right after the birth, and this can have an impact because your baby may be rarely ready to go and really actively nurse for the first couple of hours after the birth, and for the next 4, 5, 6, 7 hours be really, really sleepy. Well, if you've missed those early feeding cues because other people have been holding your baby, now your baby goes into sleep mode, and it's been a long time since your baby is breastfed. Well, the hospital staff may start to get on your case, the fact that your baby hasn't breastfed, and it just kind of upsets the whole apple cart. Moms do this because they feel like they're going to be a poor host, and they don't want to ask anybody to leave the room or tell them to go home. This results in misfeedings and awkwardness. Sometimes there's music in the room, TV, noisy people, they're on phones, they're distracting you, they're tiring you out. Some, I have seen this, they don't really want to give the baby back to you, and the baby is clearly shaking his head from back to forth, sticking his tongue out, clearly saying, "Can someone please feed me? Where's my mommy?" And the baby's still being passed around. All of this, I promise you, can make it really difficult to breastfeed your baby. It's hard to relax with all this going on, get comfortable in your bed. So I'm happy to present this podcast to you on who you give birth with matters. When I taught childbirth classes in the hospital, I went over all of this, asking parents if they've thought about who they would like to be with them during labor and postpartum. Their feedback I get is varied, and it's not so uncommon for me at some point in the class to be able to hear couples talking about disagreement about who they want to have in the room. I really like to be able to present this to you to give you an opportunity to talk to yourself about it, your significant other, to really think carefully about who was with you during your labor and birth. We all get so excited, and videos and cameras and other people in the room. However, I want to remind you, birth is a private and intimate life event that you're not going to do too often. This event involves you showing up in all your glory. There are bodily fluids and things seen and happen that you might not otherwise feel comfortable having others see you in a vulnerable position. Perhaps you think it's fine, and then the time is here and you realize that you do not want all these people. Then what? During your labor, you may have the dry heaves, you may vomit, you might cry, you're working hard, you're vocalizing. You may be asking for some medication, and maybe you don't want anybody to know. You're getting an epidural. You're walking around with your back half exposed, having other parts exposed while being examined during labor. There are many highs and lows during our labor. We have now gone from moms being attended to by female family members, guiding them, taking care of the household for weeks postpartum, cooking for them, pampering them, because they know just how important it is in the early days postpartum of getting breastfeeding going well. And they know how difficult it can be if there are too many interruptions and too many responsibilities that the mom has to take care of. We've gone from that to now having huge welcome home parties, picture taking sessions, relatives staying with you from out of town. You find yourself waking up in your own home, coming out of your bedroom, and are greeted with people that are hopefully going to be helpful, create a peaceful environment, and feed and take care of you. If the opposite is happening, a frank and open discussion needs to happen. The whole landscape has changed, and when parents want to know why breastfeeding is so hard for some moms, well, who you have at your birth and the immediate days following can definitely have an impact on your breastfeeding experience. I ask you, go to 3 people you know who are breastfeeding and ask them what they found to be helpful in the few days and few weeks after breastfeeding as far as friends and relatives. Ask them what it was like to have people in their home that they were not comfortable with, and ask them how this impacted their breastfeeding. So you want to welcome people who are going to be helpful and understanding and help things be more comfortable for you and not be a hindrance. Remember my mantra and let it become your mantra. Your baby, your birth, your body. You are not being selfish. What you're doing is taking good care of yourself. If you have found this show to be helpful, please don't let it be your best kept secret. I know I've said that to you before. Copy the link and share it with someone who you know could benefit from this information. Thanks for spending time with me, and until the next show, bye-bye.